This story happened like 10 years ago. I grew up in a smallish house. For the majority of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the room, 2 dressers and 2 closets. We didn't even have enough room for a desk. It wasn't cramped, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. So when my brother went away to college, I immediately moved his bed out of the room and commandeered the space, so to speak. With his permission, of course. I was finally at the age where a bedroom desk was a necessity, so it was nice not having to do homework in the basement or upstairs in my dad's office. That arrangement worked seamlessly for the 2 years before I myself went off to college, at which point I wasn't living at home anymore, so it didn't matter. After graduating, my brother got a city job in our hometown area, so we ended up moving back into my parents' house. And the first thing he does? You guessed it, re-sees our bedroom that I had spent months of expended effort redesigning. I was a little irritated at first, but my parents contextualized it by saying I had basically done the same thing to him, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that, so I just accepted it. By the time I graduated, I had also found a city job, so I opted to move back into my parents' house, just like my brother had. Unfortunately, I didn't have a room anymore, so I'd have to make other arrangements. The only other unused room in the house was our upstairs guest bedroom, so even though it was half the size of my old room, it would have to do the trick. The guest room was right next to my dad's office, which was the only other room on that floor. It was also directly above the garage, which meant every time someone clicked the garage door button, the whole floor would vibrate for the full 10 seconds it took the door to open. The room kind of overhangs the house slightly since it's on the corner, so there were 2 windows on intersecting walls, one overlooking the driveway and one overlooking one of the sides of the house. It wasn't ideal, but it was private and quiet most of the time. This particular incident happened on a Friday evening when I was home alone. My brother was in Baltimore for some work-related conference, and my parents were spending the night at our family shore house like they did most summer weekends. I was coming off an absolutely grueling day at work, so I decided not to go out with any of my friends or even leave the house. I just wanted to order some food and call it an early night. It was around 11:30, and I was lying in bed reading a book, trying to unwind from the day. The house was completely quiet, which was kind of nice since it's usually pretty chaotic when everyone's home. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door starting to rise, followed by that all too familiar vibrating of the floor that I'd gotten used to over the past few months. It took a few seconds for it to really hit me. None of my family members should have been home. My parents had specifically said that they were staying at the shore house until Sunday night, and my brother wasn't supposed to be back until Saturday afternoon. It took several seconds for that realization to fully sink in, but when it did, my heart started racing. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to make out anything clearly. I could see that the garage door was open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car inside or who might have opened it. Without another thought, I rummaged through the closet until I found one of the baseball bats my parents had thrown in there for my younger days. As I was quietly walking down the stairs, I tried convincing myself that there was a logical explanation for the garage door opening. Maybe my parents had forgotten something and driven back. Maybe my brother's plans changed. Hell, maybe the door had glitched and opened on its own. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, right before turning the corner toward the main part of the house, I could hear faint voices. The voices were definitely coming from the other side of the house, where all the bedrooms were. They were too quiet for me to make out what they were saying, but I could tell that there were at least 2 people talking. That's when I knew for certain that someone had broken into our house. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and telling the operator that my house was currently being burglarized. I left the call live and put the phone back in my pocket like they tell you to. The operator told me to stay put and not to announce my presence, but I felt this overwhelming urge to defend my house. It was like I was being compelled by some invisible force to do something rather than just hide and wait. So against the operator's instruction, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, clutching the baseball bat as tightly as I could. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear the sounds of drawers being opened and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for something valuable. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to do was probably stupid, but unable to stop myself. I started yelling as loudly as I could to catch them off guard, then charged into the room with the baseball bat raised above my head. There were 2 men rummaging through my mother's closet, and they both yelled out in shock when I burst through the door. I could tell they hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence despite the fact that I was outnumbered and they could have easily had weapons of their own. I swung the bat at the closer of the two men, connecting with his leg. He cursed and hobbled a few steps before falling over. I turned to the other one, but before I could get a clean swing at him, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me before I could react. The two of us hit the ground hard, and I immediately realized that this guy was significantly larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat out of my hands without much effort, then got his hands around my throat and started choking me. I was fighting for my life, clawing at his hands and trying to get him off of me, when I saw the first guy crawling towards us. He had something in his hand that looked like a knife, and in that moment, I realized I'd made a grave mistake by trying to play hero, a mistake that was going to cost me my life. I genuinely thought those might be the final moments of my life. I started accepting that I was going to die in my parents' bedroom, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then, in the background, I heard the faint sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember is the second guy picking up my baseball bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black after that. When I woke up, someone was shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see a police officer kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused, and it took me several seconds to remember what had happened. I looked around the room and saw that the door connecting my parents' bedroom to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had clearly knocked me out and fled through the back when they heard the sirens. The officer told me to stay put and not to move too much in case I was concussed or had other injuries. I had a raging headache, but I was conscious and coherent, which seemed like a good sign. Once the paramedics confirmed that I was okay, I refused to go to the hospital despite their recommendations. I gave the officers a detailed account of what happened. They told me they were currently searching the neighborhood for suspects, but by the time they'd arrived, the men were already long gone. After the police finished their investigation and took some photos of the scene, I called my parents and brother to let them know what had happened. My parents yelled at me pretty harshly for being stupid enough to confront those guys, and I deserved it. Had I just done the smart thing and hid, there's a good chance the police would have been able to apprehend the perps. The men were never found, despite the police canvassing the neighborhood and following up on a few leads. My parents installed a comprehensive security system the moment they got back from the shore house, complete with cameras, motion sensors, lights, the whole nine. The days after the break-in, something kept bothering me about the whole situation. All the doors to my house were locked that night, and the only way to open the garage door was through a little button in my car that my dad had programmed to be a wireless switch. There was no way anyone would just stumble upon it. Whoever had broken in that night had known me or my family well enough to know where that button was. Up until that moment, I never locked my car when it was in the driveway either, so that's something the culprits would have had to know as well. Even more concerning was the timing. They somehow knew that my parents would be away for the weekend, that my brother was out of town. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents were never able to determine who had broken in. It was actually something that made my dad really paranoid for a long time, since he too thought that whoever had broken in was close to the family in some way. I'm not going to go as far as to say that night changed me forever or anything cliche like that, but I will say one thing. Life before and after you've accepted you're gonna die are two very different things. I can still remember that feeling of thinking it was the end for me. It just felt so dissociating. Nothing can replicate that feeling. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken up by how calculated and personal the whole thing was. I had recently moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother, who lives about 20 minutes away from me. I found this small duplex that was perfect for my situation, close enough to get to her quickly if needed, but far enough that I still had my own space and independence. My mom has been having some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but she's had a few minor falls around the house, and she's stubborn about accepting help. I'd been trying to convince her to get one of those medical alert systems, but she insists she doesn't need one and that I'm just being overprotective. It's been a constant source of stress for me, especially knowing that she's alone most of the time. On this particular evening, I was just settling in for the night. It was around 9 p.m., and I was on the couch watching TV when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number that I didn't recognize, but since I was still relatively new to the area, I figured it might be important and answered. The woman on the other end identified herself as a nurse at a local emergency room. She said my mother had been brought in about an hour ago after taking a fall and hitting her head. According to her, my mom was conscious but asking for me, and they wanted to know if I could get to the hospital quickly. I was horrified. This was exactly the kind of call I'd been dreading since moving back. I didn't doubt the legitimacy of the call for 1 second. The woman on the other end knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned her recent hip replacement surgery from a few months ago. I immediately stopped what I was doing, trying to keep calm and level myself by saying a silent prayer. I didn't even think about locking up the house. I just grabbed my keys, pulled the front door shut behind me, and raced to my car. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. I kept running through scenarios in my head, and only a few of them were remotely good. When I got to the ER, I rushed up to the reception desk and told them I was there for my mother. I gave them her name and said I'd received a call about her fall. The nurse looked confused and checked her computer, then told me there was no record of anyone by that name being admitted or treated that evening. I insisted there had to be some mistake, since I had just gotten a call from someone claiming to be a nurse there. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. They had no record of my mother being brought in, and they suggested I try calling her directly to make sure she was okay. So that's what I did. I stepped outside and called my mom's landline, and she answered. She said she'd been sleeping and wanted to know why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was checking up on her and told her to go back to bed. And that's when the heart-sinking realization hit me. This had been a setup. Someone had deliberately given me false information to get me out of my house. I jumped back in my car, furious that I'd been tricked so easily. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door was still closed just like I'd left it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was being paranoid and nothing had happened, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The house had been completely ransacked. My TV was gone, along with my laptop and small jewelry collection I kept in my bedroom. But as I looked around more carefully, I realized the thieves had taken some really strange things too. Family photos had been removed from their frames. Not the frames themselves, just the actual photos. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet had been emptied and taken. It was insane. They had taken things that had relatively little monetary value, yet huge sentimental value to me. It was sadistic, I'm telling you. There's no reason a thief would ever take family photos. There just isn't. I called the police immediately, but I was already feeling defeated at that point. Deep down, I knew the thieves were long gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I told the police everything. I remembered the phone call verbatim, and after hearing it, the police reached the same conclusion I had. Whoever had been on the other end had known things about my mother and I that no stranger could possibly know. For the life of me, I couldn't even come up with a list of people who would have that information, or even ways that someone could have gotten that information in the first place. The officers told me to feel free to call back whenever I had something concrete. Then they left. I was utterly baffled. Just imagine how unsettled you'd feel if some stranger knew enough about you to lure you out of your house. The theft itself was bad enough, but the fact that they targeted family photos and medical information suggested it wasn't just about quick cash. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something longer term, possibly identity theft or some other scheme that required personal documentation. But over the next few weeks, nothing else happened. Even though my mother, quote, can't remember who she might have talked to about her personal info, I'm pretty confident that she's the source of the leak. She surprisingly has a lot of friends for a woman her age, and knowing her, she probably said too much to the wrong person. I've warned my mother about that very thing, and she's finally agreed to be more careful about who she gives personal information to, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched by someone who knows way too much about our lives, and isn't finished with whatever they're planning. Either way, I recently got a Ring camera, so hopefully that's enough of a deterrent. If anything else happens, I'll send an update. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and I've been living alone in this rented house for over a year now. It's a nice little place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and the rent is reasonable. I've gotten into a good routine here and really feel like I'd made it my home. The incident happened on a Thursday night around 11:30. I was getting ready for bed when I heard aggressive pounding on my front door. Not knocking, but actual pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. I looked out the window but couldn't see much because of how poorly the porch light is positioned. Despite not being able to see who it was and the aggressiveness of the knocking, I'm a pretty buff guy, so I wasn't scared or anything, more so irritated and confused. I opened the front door, careful to keep the screen door shut as an added layer of protection. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, but what I did see was surprising to say the least. There was this extremely agitated man standing there. He looked to be maybe a few years older than me. He was average height, had disheveled hair, and was wearing clothes that looked like they had been slept in multiple nights in a row. But what really caught my attention was how angry and unstable he seemed. His eyes were darting around, and he was breathing heavily like he'd been running or was having some kind of panic attack. He was also pacing around, like he couldn't keep his feet on the ground. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he started yelling that this was his house and demanding that I let him in. He said I was trespassing and that he was going to call the police if I didn't get out immediately. I thought he was either on drugs or having some kind of mental health crisis, or maybe a combination of the two. I tried to calm him down and explain that he had the wrong house, but he became even more agitated. That's when he started rattling off details about the house that made me freeze up. I don't even remember everything he said, but he knew several things about the house that you couldn't observe from outside it, details that only someone who had actually lived there would know. Like, for example, he knew that the door for the master bedroom is poorly designed and bangs into the toilet. He knew that the back door sticks and you have to lift it slightly while turning the doorknob. There was some other stuff too, but I really can't remember it all. I don't think I even said anything while he was talking. I was just standing there in shock. But that was only the beginning. It was about to get much, much weirder. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started showing me documentation. He had what appeared to be a lease agreement with his name on it, dated from about 6 months before I'd moved in. He had pieces of mail addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though I suspected it had been forged somehow. But the most unsettling part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos. They were literal pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my current couch watching TV, cooking in the kitchen, even lying down in what was now my bedroom. The photos looked recent and completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and most of them weren't solo. They had other people in them, all of whom I'd never seen before. He showed me one photo that he claimed was from this past 4th of July, just a few months ago. It was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, the woman, him, and a few other people were facing the camera and smiling at the kitchen table. There was a box of fireworks off to the side, and the detail and context of the picture made it look completely authentic. That's when I genuinely started questioning my own memory and sanity. How could this person have all this evidence if they never lived here? I started wondering if I somehow blocked out memories of sharing the house with someone, and if I was the one having some kind of psychological breakdown. It was freaky, especially since I knew for a fact that I had been home on the 4th of July, so the pictures made even less sense. The whole situation was so surreal that I told him I was going to call the police to sort everything out. Not even in an antagonistic way, I just didn't know what else to do. I figured they could check the records and determine what was going on. But the moment I mentioned calling the cops, the guy's demeanor changed completely. He suddenly became very calm and said he'd wait outside while I made the call. Then he just walked away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see where he went. When the police arrived about 10 minutes later, I explained the whole bizarre situation. They told me I should try reaching out to my landlord to get in contact with the previous tenants, and that I might get some answers that way. I had all the required documentation proving I was renting this house, but when I offered to show it to them, they waved it off. They said whoever had been on my doorstep was probably just going through a mental episode, and as long as they were gone, I should just carry on with my life. Then they left. I wasn't just going to sit there and be satisfied with that, though. Whether or not that guy had left still left the question of how in the world he had all that evidence. With my landlord's help, I was eventually able to get in contact with the previous tenants. I should mention that my landlord had no idea what had happened either, and said he didn't know anyone matching that guy's description, and had never rented to anyone like that. But anyway, the old tenants also had no idea who I was talking about. They said they'd never lived with anyone matching his description, and they'd lived in the house alone for 3 years before moving out. They were just as confused as I was about how this stranger could have such detailed knowledge of the house and apparently legitimate photos of himself inside of it. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly on edge, but nothing happened, and I started to think that maybe it had just been some elaborate scam that had failed. But of course, that turned out to be mostly wishful thinking. One night, I came home from a night on the town with my friends to find my house completely ransacked. It wasn't like a typical burglary where someone grabs obvious valuables and runs. The place was completely turned upside down, like someone had been looking for something specific. What that thing was, I had no idea. The craziest part is that most of my electronics and other valuable items were still there, despite the fact that the rooms they were in were completely trashed. The police found no signs of forced entry, which suggested that whoever did it had a copy of my key. Given the timing and connection to the strange incident 2 weeks earlier, it seemed obvious that the same person was responsible. The police took things more seriously after that, and so did my landlord. He replaced all the locks in the house immediately and free of charge, and also installed additional security measures. The going theory, and the one I believe, is that some crazy person really does believe he lives in my house and broke in to look for his personal belongings or something. And okay, sure, that's problematic enough on its own, but that does absolutely nothing to explain how he had all that documentation, let alone literal copies of my house key. I wish I had the sense to take a closer look at that so-called lease agreement he had shown me, because I might have been able to get his name. But in the moment, I just wasn't thinking clearly. The documents don't even bother me that much. All that stuff could have been easily forged or altered, including the alleged pieces of mail. What freaks me out to my core, though, are the pictures. I have no explanation for any of that stuff. It's possible they're really old pictures whose dates are doctored, but even if that's the case, it still doesn't explain how my landlord, who's owned that house his entire life, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested that I'm up against something not fully natural. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I will say that I've had this constant creepy feeling hanging over me whenever I'm in my own home, which is most of the time. I can't even begin to rationalize the whole thing. I just hope that's the end of it. I remember this night like it was yesterday, even though I'm 26 now and it happened when I was 12. My parents left me home with my 18-year-old brother Zach for the night, and at first I was excited because it was just me in the big house, which felt like huge freedom at the time. Zach told me he was going out for a few hours with friends and made me promise not to tell mom and dad, which I agreed to because I trusted him, and also why wouldn't I want the place to myself? He would get in huge trouble if my parents were to find out, and he knew that. At first, I thought it would be fun to be alone, especially on a weekend night. I ended up in the den where I decided to watch a scary movie. At that age, while home alone, not the best idea, which I learned the hard way. I had never been home alone for this long before, especially at night, and honestly, halfway through the movie, I started getting scared. Not entirely because of the movie itself, but because of the way the house sounded. The random creaks in the floor, the wind brushing against the windows, even the fridge clicking on periodically. Every time the movie made a loud sound, I would flinch, and I would look over my shoulder to behind the couch to the half flight of stairs that led to the main floor, expecting to see someone there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't know why I was subjecting myself to scaring the crap out of myself. I turned off the TV and ran upstairs to my room like a scared little kid running from imaginary demons that follow you the second you turn off the lights. When I got to my room, I went into the bathroom that connected both to my room and my parents' bedroom, where I brushed my teeth as fast as I could and tried to calm down. After that, I went into my room to play Call of Duty Zombies on my Xbox 360, thinking it would make me a little less scared. I played for a few hours, losing track of time and focusing on the game. Eventually, my team and I died on zombies, and I got frustrated. I decided it was late and I should go to sleep though. Not long after that point, I felt the vibration of the front door closing, and I assumed it was Zach coming back. I lay there awake, listening to the sounds of my brother moving around downstairs, which was odd because usually when he'd get home, he'd go right upstairs to his room. But there were weird sounds coming from downstairs for too long where it started getting unusual. They were subtle, little footsteps or indescribable thumps and thuds. I felt my stomach start churning a little. That stupid idea to watch that scary movie was really getting to me. I got up and went to the window to look outside, expecting to see Zach's car in the driveway where he usually parked, but it wasn't there. That's when the real panic set in. I had no cell phone at the time. I was only 12, so I had no way to contact my parents or Zach without leaving the bedroom and going to one of the house phones, which felt impossible at that moment. I quietly tiptoed to my bedroom door to confirm that it was locked, knowing that the lock could be unlocked from the other side with just a fingernail. I knew that if someone wanted to get in, they easily could. I looked around and decided the only safe place to hide was the small crawl-in closet built into the wall of my room. I squeezed inside, shut the door carefully from the inside, and tried to calm myself as I listened. It was at this point that I vividly remember hoping that I was just being overly paranoid and that it actually was Zach. Maybe he parked on the side of the house instead. Seconds later, I heard someone fumbling with the door, trying to get in. And then moments later, the door opened. The person was inside my room, and I had no idea who it was or what they wanted. I stayed completely still, listening to footsteps moving around my room, feeling the floorboards creak beneath the weight of someone walking, and hearing things being moved and shifted around. Every second felt like an eternity. I was terrified that the closet door could open at any second and I could be dead. I still prayed it was my brother, but I stayed quiet, barely breathing and hoping that whoever it was would leave. I could hear them dragging something across the floor at one point, which made me even more nervous. I felt like hours had passed, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, I heard footsteps receding and moving away from my room. I stayed in the closet for what seemed like forever, likely 2 hours, until finally, I heard Zach calling my name from across the house. His voice sounded urgent and pissed off, and a few moments later, he came into my room and called my name again. I stepped out of the closet, and the first thing he did was yell at me, asking what I was doing in there and what I had done to his room. It was this moment that confirmed to me that it was in fact not my brother who was in the house. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, still shaking and unable to stop my hands from trembling. Once he understood, we both got up and started looking around the house together. That's when we realized how bad it really was. Drawers had been pulled out, some of our electronics were missing, including TVs and gaming consoles. It was clear someone had been through the house and had taken things that were valuable. Zach immediately called the police, knowing that this was serious, and we waited together, still on edge, checking doors and windows to make sure nothing else was taken. The police came and made a report, writing down everything that was missing and asking us questions about what happened. They told us they would investigate and that we should wait for our parents to get home. Around 4 a.m., our parents arrived. My dad was furious and went straight for Zach, smacking him square in the face for being such a careless idiot, not only leaving me alone, but leaving the front door unlocked. My mom checked on me, gave me a hug, and told me she was just glad I was safe. Zach was forced to pay monthly rent from that point on to slowly pay back for all the things that were stolen and treated with extreme caution after that night. I, on the other hand, was not punished at all. I was just shaken up, terrified of what had happened, and the whole experience stuck with me for years. Every time I thought about it, I could feel the fear all over again, remembering hiding in that closet and hearing someone walking around my room, not knowing if I would make it out alive. It was by far the scariest experience of my life, and it has stayed with me, even now. When I was just a child, not even in kindergarten, I lived with my grandparents. My mom and dad had just separated, and my dad worked in the next town over, so I saw him every weekend. My uncle, my dad's brother, also lived with us, so I was rarely ever truly alone. I was always told to never answer the door for strangers. It was a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other. We had a neighbor who visited often to watch hockey, wrestling, or join family barbecues. I'll call him David. He was friendly with both my grandpa and my uncle. He often drank beers with my uncle and helped my grandpa with yard work or truck repairs. If my grandpa came home with a moose from hunting, he and David would haul it into the shed together. One night, I was briefly left home alone. My grandma was at bingo and I'd called for a pickup. My grandpa told me he was going to get her and asked if I wanted to come. I refused because I was watching cartoons. He reminded me not to open the door for strangers, then he left. As soon as I saw the truck pull away, the house got quiet. Only a few minutes later, someone knocked at the door. I ran up and asked aloud who it was, and I just heard David's familiar voice identifying himself. I told him that my grandparents weren't home, and he replied that he had just seen my grandpa leaving. I told him my uncle wasn't home either, and he said he had been talking to my uncle on the phone and knew he was out drinking at a friend's place. Then he asked to come in. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers, and he insisted he wasn't a stranger since he was our neighbor and someone I already know. In my child mind, he was right, but I didn't understand why he would come over when my grandpa and uncle weren't there. I unlocked the door and opened it. David towered over me. He was obviously drunk, swaying, slurring, squinting with one eye. He stepped inside and put his hands on my shoulders as I backed up. I didn't feel alarmed yet because I had seen my uncle drunk many times. I told him he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to watch TV, but he would not let go of my shoulders. I tried to pull his hands off of me, but couldn't. His voice changed, filled with anger, and he said things that frightened me, though I can't remember the exact words now, only the fear that they put in me. He dragged me into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife. He pressed the tip against my belly and asked if I wanted to be stabbed. When I cried, he told me to quiet down or he would cut my tongue or slit my throat. He dragged the dull side of the blade across my throat to show he was serious. Then I heard my grandparents' truck pulling in. Car doors closed outside. Relief flooded me, and I was about to scream for help, but David clamped his hand over my mouth. He turned us both toward the doorway just as my grandma entered. Her smile vanished when she saw him holding me with a knife. She screamed for my grandpa to get inside immediately. My grandpa rushed in, yelling in shock and fury as he demanded to know what was happening. He took one look at David holding me hostage and charged forward, shouting at David with pure rage. David shoved me to the floor. My grandma rushed over, grabbed me tightly, and blocked me from seeing what was happening while telling me I was safe. I could still hear the struggle. Eventually, my grandpa overpowered him. When I finally looked up, my grandpa was shoving David out the door, yelling at him to never come back, and then slamming the door. As I grew up, I realized David had waited deliberately. He must have known my uncle wasn't home and that my grandma was at bingo. He had seen my grandpa leave. That was his moment. I was too young to understand his intentions. Years later, after my grandpa's funeral, when I was sitting with my grandma discussing memories, I brought up that night and how heroic Grandpa had been. She looked uneasy. She said it was truly a terrifying night. She asked if I remembered that my grandpa went out hunting that same night. I faintly remembered him leaving, even though hunting at night wasn't something he usually did unless it involved camping. When I asked why he left, she claimed she didn't remember much. It got me thinking. They never called the cops to press charges on him, and I never saw him again after that night. My grandpa was respected in the community. He was friends with, as well as went to the same church as some police officers, and was known to be a good hunter. No one would ever question if they saw a bloody tarp in the back of his truck, and he was driving out of town late at night. This story happened a few years ago during spring break in 2020 when I was 15. I was home alone one night while my parents were out of town. I was just hanging out in my room when I got a call from one of my mutual friends from school, who I'll refer to as Mason. I don't usually get calls from Mason, let alone texts or keep in touch with him, but I answered anyway. Before I could get a word out, he asked what I was doing. I told him I was just at home and wasn't up to anything. He then asked if he could drop off one of my buddies because he needed a place to stay for the night. This buddy of mine is someone I've known since 3rd grade, who I'll refer to as Neil. I basically told him I didn't feel like having company over and just wanted to chill by myself. After hearing this, Mason practically begged me to let Neil stay at my house. I could sense desperation in his voice as he pleaded with me to let him drop Neil off. I was still reluctant at first, but then Mason told me he'd let me use his weed pen if I let him drop off Neil. After he said that, I caved and told him they could pull up. Looking back, I realized how dumb I was to let something like that persuade me, considering what happened next, but I was a stupid pothead at the time, so what can you do? Neil has always been very outgoing, almost with zero filter, and he doesn't care what others think about him. So when I heard from my brother and other friends the week prior that he had started acting really weird in his classes, I didn't think much of it at first. I asked my brother to elaborate, and he told me that Neil would sometimes start laughing or clapping out of nowhere, even if the classroom was completely silent, and he would sometimes say very strange things to people for no reason, like claiming the basketball coaches were Freemasons trying to convert him. After hearing this, I realized Neil wasn't acting normal, and it wasn't until he and Mason arrived at my house that I understood how bad it really was. I met Mason and Neil at my front door and greeted them like any other day. I hit Mason's weed pen as promised and gave it back. As Mason was about to leave, he grabbed Neil by the shoulders in a very serious way, tears forming in his eyes, and he pleaded with him not to do that thing. Neil looked at him blankly and casually responded that he understood. I really should have asked what was going on, but for some reason, I didn't, and I let Neil inside as Mason left. After I closed the front door, the first thing Neil asked me was whether all the doors in the house were locked. Red flags immediately went off in my head, and I knew I had just gotten into something bad. I told him they were locked and asked why. He asked me to check, so I led him down the narrow hallway by the front door to show that the back and laundry room doors were both locked. He didn't say anything after I confirmed it, and we stood in silence for a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, his hand shot up like he was raising it, and he put on this eerie, toothy smile that I can still see clearly in my mind. He held it for a few seconds before lowering his arm without saying a word. I forced a fake chuckle to make the situation seem less weird. Then, Neil asked for some water, so we went to the kitchen. As I grabbed bottles from the fridge, I noticed him lingering by the drawer with silverware, including the knives. I watched as he slowly opened the drawer and reached for a steak knife. Without thinking, I ran over, grabbed his hand before he could take it, and slammed the drawer shut. Neil didn't react or move. He just stared at me and let out a chuckle like he was pretending it was a joke. At that moment, I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and I was frozen in fear. The kind of fear people describe in life or death situations. I had never felt like my life was in danger until that moment, and I could only focus on how I was going to get Neil out of my house. He finally broke the silence by suggesting we go to the park in the neighborhood. I agreed as if nothing happened. We walked to the laundry room leading to the driveway, and I intentionally let him out first. I told him I needed to put shoes on, which I did. He paused and subtly looked disappointed, telling me to hurry up. I shut the door, locked it immediately, and called my brother to explain what had just happened. After finishing the call, I grabbed every knife in the kitchen and brought them upstairs to my room. Keep in mind, I was stoned at the time, so my decision-making wasn't perfect, but I knew I needed to prevent Neil from forcing his way back into the house. My brother arrived with 3 friends in less than 5 minutes, and they met Neil outside. I stayed inside for a few minutes, nervous, then went out. My brother and friends were talking to Neil, who was rambling about the school's basketball coaches being in the Illuminati and claiming they would sexually assault the boys on the team to make them play better. He continued talking nonsense for a few minutes. Then we decided to get him home, because there was no way I was letting him stay under my roof after what had happened. One of my friends eventually took Neil home, even though he insisted he couldn't go because he believed his dad was going to kill him. After all of this, I called Mason to ask what Neil had said to him that made him act that way, and Mason explained that during the car ride, Neil had been reading a manifesto claiming he needed to kill himself or someone else to prevent his dad from trying to kill him. Mason had panicked and just wanted to get rid of Neil, which explains why he sounded so desperate to drop him off at my house earlier. After hearing this, I lost my mind and asked Mason why he would just dump Neil at my house without warning me, though I knew part of the fault was mine for not asking sooner. Later, it was revealed that Neil had taken drugs he shouldn't have, which triggered schizophrenic episodes and caused him to hear voices. About a month later, I told my mom the story, and she was not thrilled, to put it lightly. Needless to say, I avoided something truly horrific that night by being on edge when Neil entered the house, and I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't paid attention to him in the kitchen. I was 10 years old when this happened. My mom had gone grocery shopping that day, and she asked if I wanted to come. I remember making a big stink about not wanting to. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and I just wanted to stay home and shoot hoops in the street. I told her nothing bad would happen, and she would only be gone for a couple of hours. She finally gave in and let me stay. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed the old basketball from the garage and started shooting around in the street where we had a hoop set up. I shot around for a while, doing little games with myself, pretending I was down by 1 with a buzzer shot. I was sweating a little from running back and forth, and at one point I stopped to catch my breath. I bounced the ball lazily and looked around the neighborhood as I caught my breath. That's when I looked up toward the house. At the upstairs window, someone was staring down at me. It was only a shadow behind the glass at first, like someone was standing back from the sunlight. I stared for a good second or two before the shape shifted slightly, and I realized it wasn't some kind of trick from the sun. Someone was up there at the window, looking out at the street. None of my family was supposed to be home. My sister was at college, my dad was at work, and my mom was across town buying groceries. I dropped the basketball without meaning to. The window was my sister's room. The blinds were half open, and the figure was right behind them. I say figure because that's all I saw. No distinguishable features. I didn't know what else to do except run inside and see who was home. I ran around the side of the house and through the backyard gate. I burst inside and slammed it shut behind me. I yelled up the stairs asking who was home. My voice cracked when I yelled it. For a second, I didn't hear anything. Then a voice answered from upstairs. It said, "Brad, come upstairs." It wasn't my mom, it wasn't my sister, and it wasn't my dad. It was deeper than any of their voices, but not deep like a grown man trying to sound scary. It sounded like someone trying to sound normal. I didn't go anywhere near the stairs. I ran straight through the house, grabbed the house phone off the kitchen counter, and sprinted back outside as fast as I could. I called my mom and told her someone was in the house, and she didn't believe me at first. She told me that's not something to joke about, and she said that she was almost done shopping. But I started basically crying into the phone, telling her I wasn't joking, telling her I heard someone call my name from inside, and they're at the upstairs window. She finally believed me when I started sobbing and begging her to come home. She said she was leaving the store right now. After she hung up, she must have called the police, because a cop car pulled up at the same time my mom's car turned into the driveway. She ran to me, asking where I saw the person. I pointed to the upstairs window. The police went in first. My mom followed them inside after a minute or two. I waited out front. I didn't want to go back in there. For 10 minutes, I just stood there, staring at the upstairs window. No one appeared at it again. Eventually, one of those officers came out and told me it was safe to come inside. I went in and pointed upstairs to the room where I saw the man. They checked the closets, under the bed, behind the dresser. They even checked the attic. They checked every room in the house. They didn't find anyone or anything. After the police left, my mom started acting doubtful again. She said she believed me, but I could tell she didn't fully. She said if she found out I was messing around, I'd be punished for scaring her and wasting the police's time. I kept telling her I wasn't lying. She kept saying she knew, but her voice said something else. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept thinking about the voice and that shadow behind the blinds. But eventually, I got tired enough to drift off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still dark out, and at first I thought I woke up from a bad dream. But then I heard something in my room. Just loud enough to wake me. I sat upright in my bed. My eyes were still adjusting to the dark, but I could see the outlines of my room. I could see my dresser, my closet door cracked open, my shelves, and across the room, not far from my bed, I saw something else. An unfamiliar shape. A tall, dark shape, standing completely still. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, but then the slightest movement made me realize what it was. It was a person, a full-grown person standing in my bedroom. I didn't even have time to breathe. I just screamed. A loud, broken scream that tore out of my throat. As soon as I screamed, the figure moved, fast. It darted across my room in 2 steps, grabbed my window, slid it open, and jumped out. I heard the man's feet land on the small awning below the window. My parents burst into the room as soon as I screamed. My dad ran straight to the window and looked out. Then he ran downstairs and out the back door to try to find whoever it was. I'm fairly certain he ran out there barefoot. He came back a few minutes later out of breath. He kept shaking his head and saying he didn't see anyone. They called the police again, but that time it was mostly just to file another incident report and for the cops to scout the area. We don't know how long he was in the house. All I know is he was inside during the day, long enough to know my name, and he was watching me from my sister's window, and he stayed in the house until nightfall. That, or he snuck in and out of the house through my bedroom window by climbing up on that awning. Either way, he was in my room while I slept, standing there in the dark. Who knows what else he did while he was in the house? That's the scariest part. This video is sponsored by Scentbird, the only monthly cologne and perfume subscription service out there that I trust. I've been using Scentbird for the better part of a year, and finding new colognes has never been more convenient. Through Scentbird, I found all of my favorite fragrances, and I've never gotten as many compliments on my colognes as I did this past year. Scentbird carries all the top fragrance brands with over 600 perfumes and colognes and a lot of unisex options, and it delivers them right to your door for just $17 a month. With each fragrance, you'll get a 30-day supply, so you can try out fragrances before committing to a full-size bottle. Some of the scents I received this month are African Rooibos by Chris Collins and The Hedonist by Ex Nihilo. Each bottle comes with a card which explains what the fragrance smells like. So African Rooibos has a scent that mixes the aromas of cardamom, tonka bean, orris butter, black pepper, and Rooibos tea accord. The scent is rated by users as a warm, attractive scent perfect for date nights. To help you pick a scent for you, you can also go on their website and take their quiz, which will tell you which scent is the best fragrance for you based on your lifestyle. The quiz takes less than a minute and gives you personalized results based on what you're looking for. If you're interested, scan my QR code and use Nightmare Vids to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Very few people experience something so traumatizing at a young age that it sticks with them forever. I'm one of those people. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. My older brother and I grew up in a broken household. Our mom raised us. Our dad was a deadbeat and disappeared out of our lives. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts, and would usually have our grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Austin is 2 years younger than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms given the circumstances. We lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us, and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing though. It was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that. But what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. She was watching TV and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Alex, quiet down." Austin was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30. Given that it was probably approaching that time, I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected. And then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall. Mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying goodnight to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night. Something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Austin. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms. She was whispering stuff to herself. And then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name. Jeremy, Jeremy, open the door. I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. What I distinctly remember was my grandma screaming, "Get the fuck out of here." The woman screamed, "Where is Jeremy?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming Jeremy, and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Austin, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors, mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 19 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror or anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that. It allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Megan suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or it could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Megan texted me and asked me to come over, as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Megan awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 30 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay, and I left back for my house, as it was almost 1 in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 30 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Megan was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Megan and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently when I had went over to Megan's that night, she wasn't asleep at all. She was pretending to be. Evidently, right behind me was a tall, skinny, homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Megan thought she was having an episode, when in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Megan the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation, which in turn could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experienced such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor, without a doubt. Around 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a good friend of mine, while Tom was a good friend of Mike's, who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 10 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Tom's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Mike's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I'd made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Mike had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Emma, I'm here to see Mike." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive, college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening, and besides having random customers over to grab weed, Mike would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom. "Hi, I'm here to see Mike." I replied, "Okay, he's here, just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Emma girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken-in eyes, greasy long hair down to his shoulders was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Mike buzzed her up after just hearing her name, with his train of thought being him thinking that she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Tim. Mike responded by saying his own name, that no one named Tim lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day, and not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Emma girl or her scumbag partner again. This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 15th of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 8 p.m., and the weather was scorchingly hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my ass off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast forwarding, I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day, I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner, while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold, fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing, and all of the shutters left open were noisily banging. Still drowsy, I flicked on the lamp, but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight, but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out my bedroom window. There were menacing rainy black clouds in the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching. Given that every lamppost in the street was off, I instantly knew there had been a blackout. Phone flashlight in hand, I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut the windows closed before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window, though, I noticed the mosquito net lifted up. This struck me as weird, since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place. No drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved in unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside. Trees swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy. Powerful display of nature's force, but still nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it. Feeling relieved, I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs connected to the attic, when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid it no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see light spreading across the room. It was probably a sheet lightning. I kept walking, subconsciously waiting for the thunder to come. But it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close. So why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think, maybe it wasn't lightning. What if it was a flashlight? As doubt crept in, my heart began to race. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first, I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house? Or did they also have worse intentions? Normally I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, It was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame, I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt. Despite the overwhelming fear, I did my best to keep my cool. Trying to make as little noise as possible, I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there. While I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light, I dialed 911, and speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door, when all of a sudden I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there I had no signal. As if it wasn't enough, I also noticed the battery was almost dead. Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me, so in the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why. Maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something. But I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car, and there he was. A man's face stuck to the rearview mirror. A disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulgingly wide eyes and a malicious, yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me, so intently it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me hello in an unnatural slow motion. And at that point, it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in the middle of a total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street, and I practically ran into the officer's arms, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone though, and to this day, I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen, however, I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written. "Bye-bye, beauty. You look cute when you sleep." I'm 30 years old, and I share a house with my sister. It's a 2-floor house, a mother-daughter house, meaning it has 2 kitchens. My sister takes the downstairs, I take the upstairs. My sister isn't home a lot because she often stays with her boyfriend who lives 20 miles away. Like I said, I'm 30. I shouldn't let being home alone ever freak me out. But, admittedly, sometimes it does. This happened on a night that I was home alone in my living room watching a scary movie. My part of the house is an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one big space. My couch is in the middle of the space, so as I watch TV on the couch, my back is to a large part of the room behind me. So for those a little more easily spooked, it wouldn't be the most comfortable place to be sitting alone watching a scary movie. I'll admit, as I watched in the dark room with nothing but the light from the TV to cancel the darkness of the room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder a lot. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old male that does that. But anyway, after the movie, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, then went to sleep. My sleep lasted for about 2 hours. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. It sounded like she was inside the house, so it's not like she was calling for me to open the door. But still, I knew it was my sister's voice. I didn't know what she was yelling up to me though, but I was still groggy and not thinking straight. All I could think was that she must have been calling for me, or arguing with her boyfriend. So I got out of bed and went into the pitch black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and then made my way through the living room and heard my sister's voice again from downstairs. Now I could understand her to be saying my name. I made my way downstairs in the dark, yelling back at her, "What is it?" I looked for the light switch in the foyer downstairs, but couldn't find it. I'm not lying when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch, and flick it on. The light in the kitchen lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up, but I still saw that there was no one down there. Not her, not her boyfriend. I went to her bedroom, but it was empty. I called her name really loudly one time. No one called back, but shortly after I yelled, I heard something drop to the floor in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked, and it was empty. I went back up the stairs like a little kid and went back to my bed to where my phone was. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't pick up. I had myself locked in my room, wondering if I had just hallucinated all of that. Eventually I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up to text from my sister asking why I called her at 1 a.m. I asked her if she was home last night, and she told me no, she was currently staying at her boyfriend's house. I went downstairs to her bedroom to see what may have fallen down on the floor, but there was not a single object on the floor that could have made that noise. I'm led to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night, but that's what I want to believe, because the alternative would be much more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything else, or had any kind of sleep disorders, so how vividly I heard my sister's voice, and that sound in her room, really freaks me out. I was left home alone a lot as a kid, just due to the fact that my mom was single for a good chunk of my upbringing, and she worked as an RN on a crappy RN schedule, and my brother went away to college. This was a night that my mom was working an overnight. It was a weekend night, so I had this girl Molly over who I was talking to, and she hung out for a while. We watched a couple movies and whatnot, and eventually she had to go home because her parents don't like her out late, so I was left alone to hold down the fort. I continued to watch TV in my room and bed. My bedroom is upstairs next to the backyard, so when someone dragged one of the chairs on the deck outside, I heard it. I got up and looked out the window, and I saw someone sitting on one of the deck chairs down below. I called Molly's name thinking it was her. After all, she'd only left under 10 minutes ago. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Molly. I immediately pulled away from the window to hide. That was not anybody I recognized. Not in the darkness, at least. I texted a few close friends in our group chat if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who answered all said no, and asked what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house to mess with me like that anyway. Scared shitless, but still curious, I slowly walked back over to the window to look down again, and that person was still sitting in the chair, looking up at my window. It was a he, that much was clear, and he definitely saw me. I hurried away from the window again to turn off the TV. I sat in my bed in a ball basically, with my arms wrapped around my knees. I waited in darkness for a while. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was scared he'd see the light. I didn't even want to move because the window was opened and I feared that he'd hear any movement I made. I wanted him to assume I was just no longer in the bedroom. I waited enough time. It had to be a solid 5 minutes of just sitting there. I highly doubted that man outside could still be there. I finally mustered up the courage to get up and look out the window. I felt a little part of me die inside when I saw he was still down there, looking up at my window. Instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and said down to him, "What do you want?" I then noticed his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard, but he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first, till I heard a slight whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he was wheezing, I asked him to please go away, then walked away from the window again. I went back to my bed. I was scared to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairway listening. The back door was being pushed. He was trying to get into the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was 14, I didn't know what else to do. Eventually I heard the front door's doorknob being fiddled with, and the man trying to push the front door open as well. He gave up quickly, thank God. I closed my bedroom window and curtains. If our doors weren't locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak when I was 14, and definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again that night until my mom got home around 9. I told her what happened, and her reaction was angry at me for not calling 911, and in hindsight, that was very stupid of me. One of the many things I did, or rather didn't do at a young age, that I questioned greatly. This was the story of how I almost died as a young kid home alone, and possibly the most intense night of my life with way too much going on. We're a family of 5. I was 10 at the time. My older brother was 14, my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night. My brother was out with his friends causing trouble clearly, because a dreaded phone call came to my parents. All I remember was I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game when I heard my mom start freaking out crying. I got really scared and hurried to see what was wrong. My mom was on the phone with the hospital, calling to inform my parents that my brother had gotten hit by a car. Obviously, we were all shaken and really scared. My brother's leg was broken, but I don't know what else was said on the phone. All I know is my parents hurried to get their coats on and got my little sister from her room and asked me if I was okay to stay home alone. I said yes, and they hurried out to the car and left. I was of course really worried for my brother, but I really didn't want to go to the hospital and see him in any kind of bad condition. I don't think my parents wanted me or my sister to either, but they didn't want to leave my 5-year-old sister home without them. It's worth mentioning my brother recovered just fine, as his injury is no longer relevant to the story, other than it being the reason why I was left home alone on a Friday night. Before my dad left, he was trying to calm down my mom, telling her he was going to be okay. So seeing my dad like that made me feel better. I had a feeling my mom was just being overdramatic like any mom would be. I continued playing the Star Wars game for a couple more hours, when I heard the front door open. I had my bedroom door closed. By this point, it was easily past midnight and past my bedtime, so I turned off the TV and PlayStation and crawled into my bed with my Game Boy. I tried listening to hear my parents' voices, maybe hear if my brother was with them or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes of not hearing them even come up the stairs, I had a feeling something was wrong. I went to my door and quietly opened it, then walked over to the ledge and banister that overlooked the living room. The lights were off, but there were 3 tall people standing in my living room. They weren't my family. I was so petrified that I was frozen for a second before I could quietly walk back into my room and shut the door as quietly as I could in my trepidation. But it wasn't quiet enough, and I knew it. They had to have heard the door click shut even if just slightly. I hurried to my closet door, opened it quietly, stepped inside, then shut the door. I had myself sitting behind a bunch of the boxes and bags of clothes that were stuffed in my closet. I was actually pretty covered from view. There was this short period that felt like forever that I was anticipating my bedroom door open, and it did. And at that moment, I knew I was going to die. I heard footsteps walk into the room. I couldn't tell how many people. It may have been 1, it may have been 2. I heard the footsteps move to my bed. Then I heard my covers being played with. Then silence. Then more footsteps towards the closet door. Then silence for a few seconds. And then the closet door opened. My heart was in my throat by this point. All I did was sit quietly and hold my breath. The door was open for a really long time, but I didn't look up. I didn't move. It had to be a good 20 seconds of silence before the door closed again. Footsteps walked away from the door, then out of the room. I finally looked up, and I just realized, from where I was crouched down behind the bags and boxes, I may have been visible to that person. It wasn't until probably an hour that I heard my parents return. I ran downstairs to them. The front door was left ajar by the people who broke in, and they had stolen a number of valuables from our house. It was a night that just went from bad to worse for our family. My parents were in such a rush when they left for the hospital that they apparently didn't even lock the door. I was lucky to have not been killed or kidnapped. I look back now and really wonder if the person who opened the closet and just stood there for 20 seconds saw me hiding in there. Maybe he was just a guy that came to rob a house, not to kidnap or hurt a child. Or maybe he just didn't see me and I just narrowly escaped death or injury. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents don't go out a lot. My mom's rich friend Patty invited my parents on a trip that she was paying for. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in Newark, Ohio, which is in Licking County. Yes, our county was actually called Licking County. My parents' old house had woods in the backyard and was on some quiet road that only a few cars would pass per day usually. We had a huge deck in the backyard overlooking the woods, and a decently large backyard. We even had a little fish pond and above-ground swimming pool. This was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had conversations with friends about plans for the weekend that day. This was in July of 2013. I was out on the deck smoking weed with my speaker playing music. That's about the time it started. I thought I heard a voice from out in the woods. I lowered the music and listened for a little bit. It didn't repeat, so I raised it back up. When the music was loud again, I heard a voice from out in the woods again. This time I turned the music off completely and listened for longer. There was a voice calling from the woods again, confirming I wasn't just hearing things. It was a male's voice, saying, "Hey, over here." It was kind of distant, but not too far. The woods were anywhere from 20 to 30 yards away from the deck, and that's where the voice was coming from. I didn't think in a million years it was someone calling out for me though, rather maybe just some kids playing manhunt or something. The voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." This time I realized the voice was too deep to be a kid. And when a voice yells out, "We need help," obviously that'll always be slightly concerning. I was getting a little bit uncomfortable now, because now I was questioning if these yells were directed at me. Now I heard the voice yell, "Straight in front of you, please come help us." And the voice was coming from straight in front of me in the woods. Now I had a feeling this was directed at me. I reluctantly called back, "Who is that?" And they responded, "We just need help, we're stuck in the woods." I called back, "What does that mean?" And the voice replied back, "Just please come help, straight in front of you." I got out from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and proceeded towards the woods. I called out, "I'm coming, where are you?" The voice replied instantly, "Right in front of you, I see you." I replied back, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" There was no answer this time. I stopped in my tracks about halfway towards the woods. I had a bad feeling in my gut about this. I started walking backwards, back towards the house and the deck. I didn't even want to turn my back to the woods, because it took me that long to realize there was something very suspicious about this situation. I made it back to the deck, and the voice didn't say anything else. If they truly saw me and this was real, they would have said something like, "Where are you going?" at the very least. They knew I was onto the situation, but who even knows how many people were in there? Could have been one, could have been three. All I know is getting stuck in the woods makes absolutely no sense, especially if he or they were able to literally see me. Like what? Did their shirt get caught on a branch? I went inside the house and locked all the doors just to be safe. I chilled in my living room for a bit, still high, and I think that's why I was more trusting at first, because of how high and relaxed I was. Then though, I heard the voice again from outside, closer now. Definitely in the backyard and not the woods anymore. I heard splashing of water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I hurried to the window to see. I didn't see anyone at first, but then the voice called, "I see you," with a laugh. I noticed him. It was one guy, at least one guy visible. He was hidden behind the pool on the other side, and I could only see his head. It was just too dark to make out anything besides his dark, medium-length hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. Maybe he'd lose interest if he saw I wasn't entertaining him. He was probably a sick, deranged person who enjoyed messing with people, so I didn't want to give him what he wanted. But my breaking point was when there was a horrible, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and on the other side, the guy was screaming help. I screamed at the top of my lungs to "Fuck off, you freak, the police are coming." I screamed it over and over, trying to make myself sound crazier than him. I heard him start to laugh on the other side of the glass. His laughing started to fade away as I assume he walked away. I sat back down on the couch, trembling, shaking, out of breath. I sat there for a while, and it seemed like the guy had really given up. I still got a good night's sleep that night because weed helps me sleep. I wonder if I would have handled that situation any differently if I wasn't high though. The situation made me more paranoid about who I opened my door to. I'm 23 years old, and I live at home with my parents still. One day they were both not home, and I was outside playing basketball in the front yard. At some point while I was playing, I looked up at one of our upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. Not my mom, not my sister. It was a random woman. I guess when she saw me looking at her, she dipped away from the window. When I went inside and upstairs to check the lounge room, she wasn't anywhere. I checked every single room I could, every bedroom, the bathroom, every closet. Then I checked the downstairs, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one bedroom, and more closets. Finally, I checked the basement, and I highly doubted she could be down there. It's a small basement with a couple couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places for someone to hide, but when I opened the second closet door, I was incredibly scared, as I didn't know of any other places someone could be hiding in the house. This was the last unchecked spot that I could think of. I yanked the door open as if I were ripping off a band-aid, and like I did with the closet before this one, I right away pushed myself into the closet just in case that woman was in there and I'd have the jump on her. But all I pushed myself into was a bunch of coats and coat hangers. I was so confused. I wasn't going to question my sanity though. I definitely saw that woman and I knew it. It wasn't the kind of thing you would just so vividly imagine. I went back to the middle floor and screamed very loud that whoever was in the house needs to get the F out. I actually screamed so loud that our next door neighbor came over and asked if I was okay. I told him that I literally just saw a woman at our upstairs window watching me play basketball. He came in and helped me search again. When we couldn't find her, I was left to assume that she snuck out through the back door, which I did unlock after all when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. So my neighbor left. I locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the crazy story, and they weren't too thrilled. But they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I did just that, and luckily it seemed anything that was worth something was still in place. So now fast forward to that night. I went to sleep after checking the house one more time just for peace of mind. It was hard to fall asleep though. My mind was racing for obvious reasons. Most people can't relate to seeing a stranger at their window inside of their house. But my restlessness helped me out in this situation, and here's why. I was finally starting to drift away slightly. Then I heard some noises from the other side of me. I had the fan on above me, so the room wasn't dead silent, and that's why I didn't immediately turn to my other side at the first sound I heard. But the sound started to sound human-like. I turned to my other side, and there she was, getting out from under my bed. She stood up tall above the bed, and I screamed so loud, louder than earlier before. I jumped out of my bed and tackled her to the floor and had my hand around her throat, asking her who she was. My doorbell rang, my neighbor again. I picked the tall, dirty-looking woman up off the floor and dragged her to the front door with me as she struggled and scratched at me. I still have 2 scars on my right arm from her claws. I opened my front door to my neighbor again, and he let himself in and helped me restrain the woman. This was when I called the police. The whole time we waited for the police, the woman was screaming and cursing at my neighbor and I, threatening us too. The best way to put it, she looked and acted like a meth head currently suffering from withdrawals. When the police arrived, one of the officers knew exactly who the woman was. They had dealt with her multiple times before. Her name was conveniently Karen. It was satisfying to watch her be brought into the back of the police car. I let my neighbor know how grateful I was for him coming so quickly to help. And that night, my mind continued to race. But instead of being completely freaked out, which I still was a little, I felt this overwhelming feeling of satisfaction. And I can't fully explain why. I was the only one home one Saturday night. I was sound asleep in my bed when I woke up and heard Siri on my phone talking. I turned it off, figuring it was just a glitch, and went back to sleep. An hour later, Siri woke me up again. I was a little freaked out now. Siri was responding to a strange sentence, "What that found for us?" And Siri's response was, "The answer is Thursday, July 4th, 1776. It was freaky as hell, but I still ended up dismissing it as a glitch. One more time, I woke up to Siri speaking. This time, the sentence that Siri was replying to was my full name, and her response was, "Here's the info for my name." At that point, I ran to my parents' room, locked the door, and slept in there. I still have doubts of whether it was really just a glitch. I was home alone playing computer games at like 2 in the morning when a knock came at my window. My head shot around to face the window, but there wasn't anyone there. It was winter, so I had my windows shut and my room was on the first floor. I guess you can call me the unconfrontational gamer type, so all I did was just shut my blinds to let the pranksters know that I wasn't interested. Enough time passed where I was able to forget about the knocking and get back into my game, until another steady set of knocks came at the window. I was so uneasy now. Why were they doing this? Why couldn't they just leave me alone? But by the slim chance that they actually needed something, I lifted the blinds and pulled open my window just a crack. That was the biggest and most foolish mistake I'd ever made. 2 hands from the darkness outside grabbed the bottom of the window and pushed it all the way up. I started screaming, throwing non-stop punches at the hooded man dressed in all black trying to enter my room. I grabbed the lamp sitting on my desk and bashed him in the head with it. He fell back outside, giving me the chance to shut my window. I saw him run away off our property into the darkness. I have never had a more horrifying experience. I lived way out in the country, like the turn off the paved road kind of country. I heard something crash on the roof and then smash into our metal chimney. For the next hour or so, I could hear it banging from inside the chimney, which should have been impossible since we had covered it for the summer. Then the front door started rattling as if someone was pulling on it, trying to get inside. I peered through the peephole but couldn't see anything. I finally threw open the door, and then everything stopped and went quiet. I was home alone one day in the summer. I was doing the usual watching of movies in the living room when I heard some shuffling noises coming from above me. Our living room ceiling is super high, so the attic is the only room above it. I lowered the TV down a little. I could better hear the shuffling noises coming from up there. The attic was connected to my brother's bedroom through his closet. I went to his closet and opened the attic door. The light in there was broken, so I had to use a flashlight. I only made it about 2 steps in, before I heard the sound of the weak wooden floors across the attic creaking, and then the sound of something brushing up against one of the plastic bags on the floor. I jumped out of the attic, slamming the door shut and calling my parents. My dad had a look in there when he got home, but he didn't find anything. I'm just happy it's not my room that's connected to the attic. Me and my dog Layla were home alone. I had the music turned up loud in my room, and yet I was still able to hear Layla barking like crazy at something. As I was leaving my room and walking downstairs,
I heard Layla stomping down the basement stairs, still barking. I followed her, turning the basement light on. She was in an attack stance, barking at the closed door to the boiler room. I knocked on the door, asking if anyone was in there. Layla was going crazy at this point, jumping on the door, scratching it, basically trying to break it down. I decided that if something was really in there, I didn't want to see what it was. I dragged Layla by the collar all the way back upstairs and locked the basement door. When my dad got home, I made him check the boiler room, but on his way there, he saw that there was a ladder placed on the wall by the basement window, and the window had been smashed open. My dad called the police, sounding worried, but I didn't yet know what was going on. Turned out Layla was barking at an intruder, and that I should consider myself lucky that I didn't open that door. It was very common for me to be home alone at night, as I only lived with my dad, and his shifts would constantly shift from days to nights. This happened around the time my dad was doing night shifts. I would stay up really late on these nights watching movies. It's always taken me a long time to fall asleep, so after turning off the TV to go to sleep, I probably laid there for a good half hour. Then, I heard a toy fall over in my toy closet. It was nothing too suspicious, but it still creeped me out. But then the doorknob to my closet started to wiggle, until finally unlocking the door. I hid under my covers, not making a sound. It was strangely quiet for a good 2 minutes, so I finally peeked my head out of the covers. There was a figure standing next to my bed, looking down at me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began hugging the wall behind me. The figure looked out the window and then just walked away out of the room. I stayed in that position for like an hour before checking if he was really gone. The front door was left wide open, so it seemed he had left. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. This story is from the point of view of a 16-year-old girl. I used to have a boy living next door to me that was obsessed with me. His name was Joey. Every time I would go outside, Joey would come outside as well, as if he were watching me through his windows, waiting for me. He was 17 and very weird, and he didn't seem to have any friends, as he was always home. I tried to give every sign possible that I didn't like this guy, but he wouldn't get the message, so I had to finally just tell him one day that I don't like him and to leave me alone. The look on his face that day is something that won't leave me. It was the kind of angry look a toddler gives their parents when they can't have a toy. Coming from a 17-year-old, that's much more disturbing. One night, my parents left me to watch the house. I was working on a school project when I felt my bed shift a little bit. I looked under my bed. I screamed as I saw Joey laying under my bed. I ran away while he tried to crawl out from under my bed. I ran to his house and rang the bell at least 10 times, telling his parents about it when they opened the door. Joey never came out of my house, so I called the police. His parents begged me not to, but I ignored them. The police found him still in my room and arrested him. Apparently, he admitted this wasn't the first time he had hid under my bed. They also found pictures of me scattered across his room. The most disturbing one was of me sleeping, and it was taken from inside my room. I live in the country, and more often than not, I was home alone. We don't have any neighbors close by, so I would usually just sit in the yard and tan on sunny days. There was this one time that the sun was out strong and I was tanning in our yard when I saw somebody standing in the woods, watching me. I sat up in a position ready to get up and run. Do you need something?" I yelled. The guy walked out from the woods and over to me, telling me that he lives up the hill and was wondering if I could help him out with a broken water pump. I told him that I was about to head out and that I didn't have time. It was a lie, of course, but there was no way I was going with him. He walked off back into the woods until passing a boulder, and I couldn't see him anymore. I was more creeped out than I'd ever been in my life. So with that, I folded my lounge chair up and went inside, being sure to lock all the doors and windows. You would think it ended there, but it didn't. About an hour later, I realized I forgot my sunglasses outside in the grass, so I went back out to get them. I made sure the guy wasn't anywhere in sight before going out there. It took me a little while to finally find my sunglasses, and as I feared, when I looked up, I saw the guy again. This time though, he wasn't in the woods. He was kind of hiding behind our shed so that only half of his body was visible. I yelled that I was calling the cops and ran back inside to do just that. The cops came and took down my description of the guy. Fortunately, I've never seen him since. This happened to me when I was really little. I was 7 years old, but I still remember all of it like it happened yesterday. I was sleeping over my grandma's house, like I always did when I was little. She never drove her whole life for some reason, so she would constantly be taking long walks everywhere. One day when I was sleeping over, she wanted to walk all the way to the library, which was like 10 blocks away. I didn't want to take that walk, I was a lazy kid, so she went off and told me not to answer the door to anyone. My grandma was the kind of person that was strict and she didn't baby people, so it wasn't unusual for her to leave me by myself at such a young age. Sometime while I was alone, the phone rang. I, being a dumb and curious little boy, answered it. It was a man on the other end. I remember he said, "Who is this?" I said, "Danny." "Are your parents home, Danny?" I said, "No." "So you're home alone right now, Danny?" I said, "Yes." "Where are you at right now, Danny? Do you know the address?" Somewhere in Queens," I told him. "Alright, Danny, bye-bye now." He hung up. I don't even remember thinking twice about it, but the story didn't end there, unfortunately. I'd say almost an hour later, a knock came at the door. I remembered what my grandma said, so I remained on the couch. "I see you on the couch, Danny." My little heart sank. I noticed him through the window. He was on the porch, staring at me. He was a very creepy-looking man, all gray, ugly, and a fat beer gut. I told him to go away. "I got some candy in my truck. Come on out, Danny." I ran to the guest bedroom that I slept in and locked the door. Moments later, I heard the back door being fiddled with, followed by banging and thumping as he tried to break down the door. By some miracle, I heard the loud voice of my grandmother as she yelled at him to get the hell out of the yard and that she's calling the cops. I watched through the window as the guy took off in his ratty pickup truck as my grandma tried to get the plate number. Unfortunately, she didn't remember it, but she still reported him and his vehicle to the cops. My mom never trusted my grandma to watch me again after that, but I still know that if she had arrived even 10 minutes later, God only knows what would have happened to me. I recently moved out, and I already have a horror story to tell. The house I moved into isn't anything impressive, it's just a house that's appropriate for 1 or 2 people. But I'd say right away, I started hearing weird sounds coming from inside the walls. I first heard it in the kitchen, and then in the bathroom, but on night 3, I started hearing it in my bedroom. I was sure there was some kind of animal living in my walls. I just had to figure out how to get rid of it. The next morning, I didn't even have enough milk to fill the bowl of cereal. I couldn't believe I hadn't realized I needed more milk. In fact, I seemed to be eating up all of my food pretty fast. I woke up in the middle of that night to the sound of breathing. Not my breathing. It sounded just like the breathing of a person. I flipped the lamp on and it stopped. I chalked it up as my mind playing tricks on me after waking up. The next day was really hot, so I turned on the AC for the first time. I checked every single vent, and some of them weren't blowing any air, one of them being the vent right next to my bed. I peered through the vent with a flashlight. There wasn't even a duct behind the vent. It was just the inside of the wall. It seemed that whatever air duct was in there had been removed. Unfortunately, I didn't look into the air conditioning system while buying the house, so I didn't know about this. That night, I had to sleep in the heat with no AC, so I was up pretty late constantly rolling around and flipping the pillow over. Then I eventually started to hear the breathing again, but this time I was fully awake. I knew it was real this time. It was coming to my left. I looked to my left at the air vents. The sound was surely coming from in there. I grabbed the flashlight again and shined it in through the vent. I dropped it and screamed. There was someone's face peering through the cracks of the vents. The first thing I saw were their eyes, open wide and glowing. I screamed all the way down and out the house. I soon found out there was a crazy, dangerous homeless man living in my walls, and he had been eating my food ever since I moved in.